This lecture follows our series on demigods and their quests with Heracles, or Hercules, more popularly known from the Roman name, the most outstanding of the strong men in antiquity, who is going to be the consummate sufferer as he moves through his 12 labors. Now, Hercules is going to have no continuous literary account that we have in any single source, not Ovid, not Homer, not Hesiod. Instead, everything we're going to discuss and what we know about this hero is pieced together from multiple sources. It is in fact a modern reconstruction, as they are going to be found scattered about in various publications and writings. Just as with Perseus, Heracles, or Hercules, is going to fall in line with the major folktale motifs in heroic myths, from having a divine parent, to of course breaking a taboo, all the way to becoming a god at his death. All of these are going to be the traditional lockstep for the stories associated with demigods and heroes. Now, Heracles is a Bronze Age hero and comes from a common folktale type of hero. His name, interestingly enough, originally means the renown of Hera, as the goddess Hera is bound into the story of Hercules. This is very interesting because Hera is going to torment him throughout his life. He is often considered the earliest hero to be represented in art, such as this orientalizing sculpture here of a hero battling a centaur, which we believe to be Nessus, we'll discuss here shortly, fending off again this centaur as he's trying to make away with Heracles' bride Deianira. He must participate in the gigantomachy for the Olympians to win, as is seen in the movie Immortals with Theseus, as heroes participate in this last great battle for the universe against the forces of monstrous Mother Nature. Now, Perseus' son, Electryon, is going to marry his own niece, Anaxo, and they had a daughter, Alcmene, as well as 9 sons. Alcmene will be a consort of Zeus and is bound up in a very interesting story. The story is pirates are going to attack all of her brothers, killing all but one, who of course vows to avenge them, but before he is able to, Amphitryon, his nephew, kills him. Amphitryon marries Alcmene then, but she would not sleep with him until his brother's death was avenged. He leaves to kill the pirates, at which time Zeus spies her and, of course, makes her one of his consorts, interestingly enough by transforming himself into her husband's visage, looking like him, coming into her bedroom, displaying the booty and proof that he had succeeded in killing these pirates, and thus demands sexual favors that she had promised, waiting to consummate their relationship. Now, Zeus leaves just before the real Amphitryon is going to appear, demanding the exact same thing. She is quite confused by this, but of course agrees. Now, the act of being fertilized by both a divine and a mortal seed is going to lead to the birth of twins, one mortal and one semi-divine. So you find that Zeus is going to father Hercules, and then Amphitryon is going to father Iphicles, his half-brother in this way. But they're both in the womb at the same time. Zeus swore on Heracles' birth that his seed would rule over all the surrounding lands. Hera prevented his birth, slowing it down as she always does, hastening that of Eurystheus, who's going to be Zeus's grandson. Thus Eurystheus becomes the king and Heracles becomes a slave to his cousin. Now, twins in Greek mythology are quite interesting because they're either very close friends or bitter enemies. There is, of course, a natural explanation to the dual paternity as seen by the Greeks. The idea they actually got from the Egyptian pharaohs, who, of course, the god Ra would come to the queen, who had also been inseminated by the pharaoh simultaneously. Thus, we find that the pharaohs are going to be divinely ordained and produced by this union of a divine entity, the sun god, and the queen. Amphitryon is going to know that one of his kids is actually that of Zeus's and not his own, but he wasn't really sure which, until Hera sends these venomous serpents to kill him. You find that Heracles is going to strangle the snakes in his crib as a baby, and so showing his divine parentage, he can ward off this harm. This is just one of many entertaining early asides relating to Heracles, such as when Zeus is going to ensure Heracles will be great by allowing him to suckle at Hera's breast and divine milk. Of course, he's the strongest demigod, and so he bites down, and Hera screams. Thus, the milk that sprays out of this result is going to create the Milky Way, the Greek explanation, the etymological explanation for the stars in the sky. Now, Heracles has an aristocratic education of wrestling, archery, fighting, and learning to play music with the lyre. This is, of course, the same as all people that are of means at the time. However, he is, of course, too strong and too big, so his hands are going to break the lyre every time. His teacher complained bitterly about him breaking these instruments, so Heracles bashed his head in with the instrument, killing him. He would then be tried for murder, but acquitted for self-defense, interestingly enough. He is then sent to a nearby town where King Thespius is going to note how big and strong he is. So he sends his 50 daughters in each night to get pregnant. He thought they were the same woman because he was either drunk or, in another tradition, they all come in the same night. This leads to the children of Heracles. So the king of Thebes, Creon, gives his wife Megara as his first wife. He is going to father 3 children with her and settle down for a normal existence. Of course, Hera will not allow him to be happy, so most clearly in Euripides and the tragedy of Heracles Insane of around 414 BCE, Hera sends madness upon him, making him think his family are his enemies, and so just like Eurystheus, so he thinks he's killing this other cousin that he has, but instead slaughters his wife and children. Now, Euripides relates this type of irrational emotion to women, and so he was overtaken with the emotions of a woman in this instance. But he, either way, commits a grave transgression in Greek civilization. He is going to be guilty of kindred bloodshed, or miasma, blood pollution, that he must then seek some type of retribution or some type of cleansing for it. In 416 BCE, we find that this story likely has an historical precedent, for in real life at Melos, we find the city revolts against the Athenian control and its empire. Athens crushes them, killing every adult male, enslaving their women and children. So it is believed that the play by Euripides uses the story of Heracles to dramatize this contemporary horror that just took place. Now, in order to cleanse oneself of miasma, you generally travel to the Oracle of Delphi. There, the oracle is going to help him learn how to atone for his crime and cleanse him of this blood pollution. The oracle tells him to leave Thebes, to go to the Argive plain, where King of Mycenae, his cousin and mortal enemy, Eurystheus, will give him the 12 labors that will help him cleanse this miasma and at the same time grant him the prize of immortality. Now, there are categories to these labors that Heracles is responsible for in order to cleanse himself. The official 12 labors are those given by Eurystheus, and of course through the command of Hera. So Hera is trying to punish Heracles through Eurystheus, and so we find that all of these impossible feats that would kill a mortal man are her way of tormenting him. But there are other stories that you're familiar with that go along with the myths of Heracles. We have deeds, which are other exploits unrelated to the labors. And then you have side deeds that are subsidiary adventures that are going to be bound within each labor. Usually he's en route to something or on the way back from a labor and something else happens. That's a side deed. We will go through each of them in detail, but the 12 labors are going to move between the first, which is slaying the Nemean lion, all the way to capturing the three-headed dog of Hades, Cerberus. They become increasingly difficult as we move through each labor, from slaying individual beasts that are going to threaten the countryside and man, to, of course, protecting civilization by overcoming the Amazonian queen, to then going to hell itself. These labors are often shown later in art as a psychomachia theme, or a victory of virtue over vice. For Hercules is the strongest man in the world, so he could choose an easy life, as it was understood in this culture. But instead, he opts to go through these rather difficult labors to achieve glory and immortality. So for later Christians, this is a clear moral choice of one of moral depravity and, of course, hedonism, only, of course, concerning himself with his own senses and erotic desires, or going the hard route, as the poets would then write epics about him, and eventually reaching his apotheosis. As with all of the stories relating to Greek myth, the location of where the labors of Heracles took place are all identifiable on modern maps. All of them starting off, especially the first 4 and then the 7th labor, are going to be around the area that he grew up and where he historically is from, that being around Mycenae, Tiryns, and Argos. The first labor he is given is to destroy a beast that is terrorizing the people of the countryside, the Nemean lion. He realizes early on in battling this beast that his arrows bounce off of it because its pelt is impenetrable. So he chased it down to its lair and, in a wrestler's grip, breaks its neck. Now, he could not skin the animal at this point as proof that he killed it, and for another reason, because its skin is impervious to all types of weapons. So he must take the creature's own claws to remove its pelt. So thereafter, Heracles has this impenetrable armor that he wears, and he will always be identified as carrying the club that is cut from Nemea, this region. So these two are his major identifiers and tie him into this first myth. The second labor is probably one of his most famous, as he battles a 9-headed hydra, or the serpent. It comes up in pop culture quite frequently, and everyone knows the story. Now, the Hydra is going to be the offspring of Gaia and Pontus, who creates all of these monsters, including the Keto, the dragon that threatens Andromeda, Harpies, the Nereids, and down to the Chimera and Sphinx. It is part of these offspring that are horrific beasts that are going to kill man. Now, Hydra actually means water serpent, and this multi-headed serpent lives in the swamps of Lerna. Like the lion, it is killing people and ravaging the land, so this labor actually helps protect people. Obviously, Hera would have expected, giving this order, that he would be killed, because this beast is very dangerous. Now, Iolaus is going to be the hero's companion for Heracles and his nephew. He accompanies him in his labors, many of them starting out. He flushed out the Hydra from its lair with burning arrows. The Hydra then wraps one leg around Heracles' leg, while a giant crab grabs the other. He kills the giant crab, and it thus becomes the constellation of Cancer. The problem with killing the Hydra is every time you cut off one of its heads, 2 grow back. Iolaus is going to come up with the solution of cauterizing each one of the stumps after Heracles cuts them off, so they'll stop growing back, until finally Heracles is going to cut off the immortal central head. He splits it open after decapitating it and dips his arrows into this thick black blood of the Hydra that is venomous. So from that point onwards, Heracles is going to have these toxic arrows that he can shoot as part of his arsenal. This story of a heroic battle of man versus nature is understood as an allegory later on, as man fighting nature, and of course all the elements associated with it and coming out on top. It also can be understood as insatiability of human appetite, that you can never slate it no matter how you try. Turning now to the third labor, we find that Eurystheus is going to have Heracles capture the golden hind of Artemis, otherwise known as a golden stag, which is, of course, miraculous, given that only male deer or bucks grow horns. In this instance, it is the sacred deer of Artemis and is a doe. Now, this is an uncatchable deer sacred to her. It is female with brazen hooves, so it can actually outrun an arrow. We find this in art is going to have Heracles with his lion skin protecting him, grabbing this deer as the twins Apollo and Artemis look on. He stalked this creature for a full year, wounding it with an arrow eventually, but he had to actually chase after it. He is stopped after catching it by Artemis and Apollo. We find that Heracles apologizes to the gods, especially Artemis, for offending her, and then Artemis allows him to show the deer before releasing it to King Eurystheus, proving he has succeeded in this labor. The fourth labor is the capture of the Erymanthean boar, this boar that's also terrorizing the countryside and killing people. It is while pursuing this boar we have a side deed. He stops to visit a centaur Pholus and asks for wine belonging to all centaurs. This makes the neighboring centaurs gather in a threatening manner, so Heracles fires an arrow, hitting the wise old centaur Chiron accidentally, this teacher that is so beloved. Given that he is immortal, he's in agony but cannot die, much like Prometheus, who trades his immortality, allowing the centaur finally to die. Now Nessus, another centaur, is present, and he is going to witness this event and hates Heracles for it. Thus he will eventually cause Heracles' death later in this story. The fifth labor actually requires Heracles to do manual labor, thus, of course, something beneath him at this point as a hero. He must clean the Augean stables in a single day. Augeas is going to be the son of Helios, the chariot-driving god of the sun. He never cleaned his stables, so therefore Heracles bargains with him and says that if he can clean them in a single day, then he would be entitled to 1/10 of this god's cattle. He then diverts the river to the stables. But when Augeas learns of his obligation to pay Eurystheus, he refuses again to pay, that this is a requirement of Heracles. Angered, Heracles returns and kills the king and his sons, and institutes the Olympic Games thereafter. We should note that the Olympic Games are innately tied to the myths of Heracles and his labors, as of course we find these perfect athletes and models of human perfection are going to be performing feats that the average mortal cannot. The sixth labor, much like his earlier ones, involves a dangerous beast. This time, the Stymphalian birds, who had arrow-firing wings that could pierce armor. He drove them from their cover by clanging bronze castanets, then shot them down one at a time with arrows. This, of course, gives us the fear that we find in Hitchcock's Birds. All of this so far takes place in the Peloponnesus, on the mainland. Now Eurystheus orders Heracles to go to Crete for a new labor. There, for his seventh labor, he must capture the Cretan bull. He captures, in fact, the bull of Minos that rose from the sea. Seizing the beast by the horns, he tossed it in the sea and rode it like a cowboy back to the mainland. This, of course, references that Cretan domination is over when we have the rise of the Greek mainland. He then released the bull on the mainland that will later, in a myth as we will discuss, be killed by Theseus. Next, he's sent to Thrace to face a savage tribe. Here, he must steal the mares of Diomedes, who is a king of a Thracian tribe who is the son of Ares. He would feed humans to his horses. The side deed, as he is on his way, as stated in Euripides' Alcestis, is that he stops at the court of Admetus, where he finds the court all in mourning. Getting drunk, he then lectures a servant for being so glum. He then discovers that the kingdom mourns for their queen, who agreed to die in her husband's place to make him immortal, which was Apollo's gift. Heracles greatly regrets his behavior and wrestles off death himself, Thanatos, and takes Alcestis back. Promptly he captures the horses of Diomedes and feeds the evil king to them, thus then bringing them home back to the Eurystheus. They then run off to the mountain of Olympus, where they are eaten by wolves. So therefore that which destroys is now destroyed. Next he travels further east, south of the Black Sea, to the Amazons. The ninth labor asks him to obtain the girdle of the Amazonian queen. The Amazons are a race of women who, of course, are going to mate with men periodically and then kill the boys or enslave them. They are going to be fought by all of the greatest heroes. Theseus, Dionysus, Achilles, and Heracles all must fight this band of warrior women. Now, supposedly this belt is worn above the hips, so to loosen the belt was to offer oneself sexually, but to take it forcibly was considered rape. Upon arrival, Hippolyta gladly offers Heracles the belt, but this angers Hera because she wanted to see him suffer and see a fight. So she disguises herself as an Amazon and runs to the city claiming that Heracles has abducted their queen. The Amazons then attacked. Heracles strangled Hippolyta, removed the girdle, and sailed away. He then is asked to travel beyond the known world through the Pillars of Heracles, or the Rocks of Gibraltar as we now know them, separating Spain or Western Europe and North Africa. Crossing Africa, he got so hot that he fired at Helios, driving his chariot. The god gave him a cup as, of course, a gift. Passing through the Rock of Gibraltar into the Gerion's realm, this cup will come in handy. The 10th labor, in fact, is to obtain the cattle of the monster Geryon. He would, in fact, bash in the skull of the two-headed dog Orthus that followed him, killing a herdsman Eurytion and felling the Geryon with his arrows. He put the cattle of the Geryon in a cup to bob back to the known worlds. This was beyond the known world. He drives his cattle across Spain to Italy, where some of his cattle are stolen by a new beast. This is one of the side deeds of this labor, where he needs to defeat the monster Cacus, who is a three-headed fire-breathing monster that hid in a cave on the Palatine Hill in Rome. Heracles hears the monster inside, rips off the top of the cave, leaps inside, and beats him to death with a club. Therefore, in art, we see him subduing this figure with his very iconic club. In the 11th labor, he's asked to steal the apples of the Hesperides. Now, these are very special apples indeed, for Gaia gave her granddaughter Hera these specific apples that grew on a magical tree with golden bark as a wedding gift. She planted this in the garden at the foot of Mount Atlas, as the story goes. The problem is nymphs kept eating the fruit, so Hera set a 100-headed serpent Ladon to guard this tree, or we have the daughters of Atlas. Often you see them together, as you see here. Now, as Heracles needed to find where this was, he had to go to the sea god Nereus, who would change into every shape until, as Heracles wrestled it, it gave him directions. The side deed to the golden apples leads him to Prometheus, where he sets him free by killing the eagle of Zeus, thus revealing a prophecy. Another side deed in this 11th labor is where he is en route to the Hesperides and is stopped by a giant Antaeus, who is the son of Poseidon and Gaia, thus a monster. In the Libyan desert, this giant would kill anyone who passed by to collect their skulls in order to build a temple to Poseidon. Heracles is going to battle this giant for weeks, of course not knowing how to defeat him. For every time he would deliver a blow and the giant would fall to the ground, he would immediately gain strength and be re-energized by his mother Gaia, who gave him life to begin with. Eventually, Heracles realized that if he lifted him off the ground and strangled the life from him, that he would be unable to be revitalized in this way. Moving on now to Atlas in the story of Heracles and his labors, we find that Atlas is separating the earth and the sky, and it is his daughters who know where and are guarding the golden apples. Heracles convinces Atlas to retrieve these apples. In return, he would then refuse to take back the globe. So as the story goes, we find that Heracles states that he will hold up the sky while Atlas goes to his daughters. Atlas agrees, brings them back, but then refuses to take back the sky above. You can see here Athena supporting the dome of the heavens along with Heracles, helping this hero. We find that Heracles tricks him by stating that he will take the globe of the heavens if Atlas will hold it for a minute while he gets comfortable. Once Atlas has taken the sky back, then Heracles reveals the deception that he never intended to take it back. That's why in art, this is one of the most popular parts of the myth of Heracles, the 11th labor, for we find him holding these golden apples in many works of art, because he is almost at the end. He has almost finished the labors. He gives the apples to Eurystheus, but they are far too powerful and dangerous to keep. They are returned to Heracles, who gives them to Athena, who finally restores them in the Garden of the Hesperides. For his 12th and final labor, he must descend into the underworld itself as so many other heroes. This he does so at Taenarum, at the tip of the Peloponnesus, the same place where Orpheus descended. He must capture and bring back the three-headed guardian of the underworld, Cerberus. He requests permission to take the dog to Eurystheus from Hades and Persephone, who agreed. But he must, of course, wrestle the dog with his bare hands without, again, any weapons. Once again, he is protected by a lion skin, so he seizes the beast, and that protects him from the snake tail that lashes out at him. He passes a chain, just as you would a dog, around him and drags him to the upper world. At this point, he is released from his servitude. He has finished all 12 labors, at which time he goes to Tiryns, where the king offers his daughter Iole as a prize in an archery contest. Of course, Heracles easily wins, but the king refuses to give up his daughter, fearing the same fate as with Megara, as she was murdered by him. Enraged, we find that after the king blames Heracles of missing cattle, his son Iphitus is going to defend him and goes to Tiryns to clear up the misunderstanding. Heracles then pushes him off the ramparts for meddling. Again, he is violating Xenia as he killed a guest. He goes back to the oracle to ask once again how to cleanse this blood pollution, but the oracle refuses to speak to him because he is twice accused. The story goes, Heracles steals the holy tripod upon which the Pythia sits, runs down the road claiming he would set up his own oracle. Apollo seizes the tripod and a tug of war commences between this demigod and the god of the sun. Apollo finally relents and agrees to purify him on specific conditions. First, he must serve as a slave to a woman for 3 years, and second, he must give the estate to Eurytus as blood money for Iphitus, whom he had killed. Hermes is going to take Heracles then to the slave market, where he is immediately purchased by Queen of Lydia, Omphale, who liked his physique, we are told. He then spends 3 years in debased pleasures as a sex slave. Upon completion of this servitude, he leaves Lydia, gathering an army to settle old scores. He hears the beauty of Deianira while he's in the underworld and goes to seek her out. The river god Aeolus wanted her as well, so he wrestles this river for her. Now, after winning his new bride Deianira, he travels to Trachis, crossing the river Evenus, where the centaur Nessus ferried travelers back and forth. Now, he was driven out of his homeland by Heracles long ago, and he also witnessed Heracles killing Chiron, so he has a grudge. We find the centaur assaults Deianira while crossing the river, so Heracles shoots a poisoned arrow at him. As he is, of course, dying, Nessus tells Deianira to dip the cloak in his blood and semen, which is a powerful love potion, he tells her at least, should she ever doubt his fidelity. Heracles continues to exact revenge for the loss of Iole. Deianira hears about this, and that of course she is not his only love. Fearing that he is cheating on her once again, uses this love potion. It gives it to him, and the shirt with the centaur's blood poisons him. Of course he cannot die by human hands though. Now, once she realizes she'd made a mistake and that she's harming her love, she stabs herself to death and commits suicide. Zeus earlier on warned that Heracles could not be killed by a living man. So to end the story and to reach his apotheosis, to make him a god, he builds his own self-funeral pyre, lays down on it, and burns alive. When his ashes cooled, it is said that only his armor remained. No trace of bone or any flesh was there. Becoming a god, shedding his mortal flesh, he then marries the god Hebe, the daughter of Zeus and Hera, representing youth. Now the Heraclids, or the children of Heracles, were protected by the Athenians. They killed Eurystheus and his 5 sons as part of revenge for what Eurystheus had done to Heracles all those times and all those years ago. The Spartans thereafter claimed to be direct descendants of Heracles, whereas many, including his descendants we'll discuss next time, will go on to be important demigods themselves.